Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Tiers from Tutor Collegiate Strategies, and you're about to check out the latest episode of the Mission Admissions Podcast, a show that's designed to help higher ed become better recruiters, communicators, marketers, and managers. Each week, I'll introduce you to an industry leader or difference maker who will share helpful advice, tips, and strategies that will help you grow professionally and personally. Mission Admissions is part of the Enrollify podcast network and is made possible by Gecko, an engagement platform that makes it easy for your team to deliver a better student experience. I'm excited to share my latest candid conversation, so let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Tiers, and this is episode 6 of the Mission Admissions podcast. For me, it's always fun to chat with like-minded difference makers who make it their mission to invest in others, and Lindsay Hotmire is one of those people. Lindsay is a brand storyteller and story coach who helps solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, and brands, including IHG, Disney, and Coca-Cola, nail their positioning, own their value, and cut through the noise to get their message to stand out. Lindsay created this wonderful thing that we will talk about today called the Unbrand Method, and she's got a unique story finding method that has been featured at numerous events, including the Content Marketing Institute, Inbound, and Content Marketing World, as well as with podcast audiences around the globe. Lindsay, like me, lives in the Midwest in the fun state of Indiana with her husband and is almost an empty nester mom to 4 kids. So welcome to the show, Lindsay.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I want to dive right into this lovely buzzword, Lindsay, that I feel like from marketers, from, admissions people, coaches, I have heard about for what feels like 2 to 3 years now, which is authenticity. Why do you think we all crave authenticity as humans?
Yeah. As humans, I think, I'm not an anthropologist or a biologist, but I think one of the things that sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom is that we are meaning makers. From the time we're aware enough, we're cognizant enough to really start asking questions, those deeper questions of why. We're always searching for meaning to understand the deeper things of life. And so as humans, we want to make impact, right? We want to show up and we want to make impact. And most of us do. Most of us want to know that we're going to leave this world a little better than what we showed up, that we're going to do our part. And so because of that desire to know that what we do matters, you have to be real. Things have to be real for you to matter. And that's at the core what authenticity is. It's a realness. And so I think with the heightened reality of the digital age of social media, it's no shock. It should come as no shock that we're craving authenticity. We're talking about it, ad nauseum, because when there's a deficit of something that we often see on social media, it's easy to show up as anybody, and any of us can create a persona and be that and not be that real persona in real life. And so there's that tension that we live with as humans now of, is this truly real? And because we're living in that tension, we're craving for the very thing that we're lacking so much of, which is authenticity.
Do you think a 16-year-old or a 47-year-old like me views authenticity differently, or do you think at its core it doesn't matter if it's my 13-year-old daughter, a teenager, or you or I, we all kind of view it the same way?
I think that there's a lack of understanding sometimes about what authenticity really is. Like there's that shallow depth of understanding of authenticity just means you show up and you just, verbal vomit your whole life to somebody, and that makes you authentic. Or you don't hide any of the raw, real, messy parts of you, that makes you authentic. Or even authenticity is equated with goodness, like bad people can't be authentic. And so I think that there's a lack of understanding and it's not always perceived or understood the same way across the board, which I think is part of the problem, quite honestly. Like, if we had a deeper philosophical understanding of what really does it mean to be authentic, then more of us could explore that and step into it in more authentic ways.
I love what you said there, especially the lovely word vomit, because I feel like that is something that, the conference I was at yesterday, for example, one of the things I told the audience was there is too much vomiting of information going on right now in the world I live in, which is college admissions and enrollment marketing. Talk to me a little bit about how somebody, if they're trying to figure out whether they're being authentic enough, how do you audit yourself, or can you even really audit yourself to figure out if you need to be more authentic in the conversations that people are having and the relationships they're trying to build?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Should you audit yourself? And the answer is yes. And I think that that's part of why we have so much inauthenticity going around, because we think that authenticity, because it's real, it's just being who you are, air quotes for everybody who can't see me, that it shouldn't take work. And that's just false. Like, living an authentic life, being an authentic business, an authentic brand, that takes constant work and constant evaluation. And a couple years ago, I plunged myself in and really started studying authenticity. And really, as a science, we've been talking about authenticity, since Aristotle or before, for ages. We've been talking about this. The concept isn't new, but from a truly scientific understanding, that understanding didn't really emerge on scene until the early 2000s. Two researchers, Corynn and Goldman, studied authenticity and asked themselves, what does it mean to be authentic? And their work has become like the foundation for my own. And through their work, I created something called the authenticity flywheel. And that really is the tool that I use to help my clients audit their own levels of authenticity. And what I have discovered with this tool is that when I take my clients through it, this is where we start to discover the gaps in their communication. And so the 4 areas of authenticity are, number 1 is your values. What is it that we really believe? And that, for me, I don't want to go down the rabbit trail. I'll just say this. A lot of times the values that people think that they have aren't truly their core values. Patrick Lencioni is a leadership coach, and he talks about the difference, the distinction between core values and what he calls permission to play values. And a lot of brands are showing up on scene with these permission to play values, the values that your audience expects you to have as a university, as a lawyer, as a business coach. And people are showing up with that and saying, hey, these are our core values. But your core values are really the things that you're inclined to take too far. The things that nobody else has, the things that truly set you apart, that some people might be like, whoa, that makes them weird, or that's crazy, or is that really true? And so that's the first thing. Like, what are the values, the principles that you have used to order your life? The second piece then is actions. And so this is the hard piece. This is the piece where you say, okay, these are my values. What am I actually doing to live my life according to those values? What are we actually doing as a brand to reflect those values? It's really easy to say, hey, these are our values. But if you're not living out your life or taking the actions, the behaviors to actually reflect those values, then red alert, those aren't your values. Third is honesty. This deals with bias and assumption, like how objectively are we living our lives without bias and assumption. And we've heard a lot about bias and assumption in the last 2 years or so. And so I think that this is a concept people are more aware of, but actually stepping into that in an honest way and assessing where are my biases, what assumptions am I making, and not just on a political or sociological scale, but even about our own audiences and how are we leading with assumptions and biases about our own audiences or about our own strengths as a brand. And then the last piece is community, which is, am I inviting open, honest, sincere relationships with others? And if so, how? Like, where's the proof in the pudding that I'm actually doing that? Like, we can think that everybody loves us, but where's the proof that that's actually happening? And so values, action, honesty, and community are the four basic principles of authenticity. And those are the things that you need to go through constantly. It's a constant awareness. And by the way, Kernis and Goldman say, very rarely are all four of those things going to be in constant alignment. Like, there is going to be tension, and that's fine. Like, the thing that makes you authentic is that awareness of, ooh, there's some tension here, and we need to fix it. It's not about perfection. It's about wrestling with the tension and doing something about it.
I don't think I've met a single higher ed professional that loved everything about their technology stack. Here's the honest truth. No CRM or SIS will be able to meet all of the needs of all of your team. And that's why I'm a huge fan of Gecko, a student engagement platform that offers customizable modules designed to complement your institution's CRM and SIS. Gecko offers plug-and-play modules that enable your team to deliver memorable student experiences at scale. Their chatbot and texting tools will empower your admissions team to engage with the highest quality prospects by serving as a front line of defense for prospects that have basic questions about the college admissions process. Gecko's event module makes it easy to create awesome online and in-person event experiences one time and then duplicate them throughout the year with just a couple of clicks. Their call center is also an industry leader. No more splitting call lists into a dozen Excel files, scrolling through data to find who you need to call next, or having to manually record who picked up and who didn't. Oh, and did I mention that everything integrates seamlessly into your CRM and SIS? Because it does. So if you're a Slate School, for example, you'll see all of that sweet interaction data in your student's timeline. If you want to level up how you engage with prospective students, but you don't want to disrupt your processes, rip out all your tech, or start a new CRM procurement process, you need to check Gecko out. You can learn more about their offerings at geckoengage.com/Enrollify. And be sure to tell them that Jeremy and the Enrollify team sent you their way. So how do you figure out then, and this is a loaded question I know, but how do you figure out then who you are if you're at college, for example, and you want to serve all of these different populations who all have different things they value and different things they're looking for, and you want to serve them all, which you may or may not be set up to do? How do you ultimately position yourself to either recognize, we can't serve all these people, we need to stop trying to your point, say this is what we're trying to do, and then our actions don't match it? Or is it, you could do that if you did X better, whatever X is? Does that make sense?
I think it comes back to a self-knowing, and really this goes to, in the intro you talked about the unbrand method, which is the framework, the method that I use when I take my clients through their branding. And it really starts with that self-knowing. The unbrand method is really founded on the concept of worldview. We all have a worldview. It's the lens we use to look at the world. It's the compass we use to direct our actions, our behaviors, our relationships, everything. Like, everything filters through our worldview. Every one of us has one. Very few of us actually understand what our worldview is, how it's been formed, what informs it. Very few of us have been taught to actually step into our lives and look at it through the lens of our worldview and make decisions. And so I take my clients through the three basic questions of any worldview. No matter what your worldview is, these are the three basic questions, which is, why am I here? What's gone wrong with my world? What can I do to fix it? And so when a university takes itself through those three questions, why are we here? What's gone wrong with our world? And what can we do to fix it? There becomes this greater sense of self-knowing and understanding of, this is who we are, unapologetically. Like, this is who we are. And because of that, we cannot reach everybody. We cannot be all things to all people because we have a specific worldview. And as a result, we are going to attract certain people and we are going to repel certain people. What I have found is that that second question in the unbrand method, what has gone wrong with my world, as marketers and as humans, that's the easiest question for us to answer. Marketers are deconstructionist by nature. We step into situations and we see what is broken. And it's really easy for us to point fingers and say, that's broken. The harder part for us as marketers and as humans is to say, what can we do to fix it?
Why is that so hard though, Lindsay?
Because it's putting a responsibility on us as people, as marketers, to actually do the hard work. I mean, man, it's so easy to just be like, I survey everything and here's everything you need to fix, and then run out the door and let everybody deal with the mess. But actually sticking around and getting yourself really dirty to fix it, that's hard. And we aren't all equipped to be the fixers, but that's where we have to invite people in to help us be the fixers. We're not going to all play the role of that, but what's my responsibility here to fix it? And so, trying to circle back to your question, I think that when you filter everything that you do through those questions, that becomes your litmus test for, is this what we're supposed to be doing? Are we equipped to do this? Does this align with who we are and what we believe and where we're going? And if the answer is no, if you want to be authentic, you have to have the audacity almost to say, okay, like to honor, this is who we are. Like we can try to be something else, but if it doesn't, if that's something else, if you don't have the makeup to be that something else, then you're just setting yourself up for failure. I think as business people, we've probably all done that. Like we've stepped into, okay, I'll take this client on because I need the money or whatever. And how often does that actually end in success? Like it's usually a disaster, and I've done that enough that I'm like, no more. I'm never doing that again. But man, it takes some hard lessons to learn that. And when you're talking at a large scale and you do that, you step in, the failure isn't just like a slap on the arm and hey, don't do that again. It's millions of dollars of failure. And so you have to be able to justify what you're doing and how you're connecting and how you're reaching out with that deep understanding of who you are.
Do you think the lack of, I'll call it back to what you said, action a lot of times then is because if I'm the director of enrollment marketing or I'm a vice president of enrollment, okay, I'm able to identify what we're trying to do, who we're trying to serve, but then when I go to take action, if we need to make changes, how much of it is, but I have a terrible relationship with all these other people and we're siloed, and so part of the problem is I can't do all this, to your point, alone. Is that something you see a lot with your clients too? And if so, what type of advice do you give them in that situation?
I don't know that I necessarily see the siloed struggle that universities and colleges deal with, because that is very true. Universities and colleges still remain very siloed. I think that reflects back to the authenticity flywheel piece of community. And if you're constantly asking yourselves, how am I building open, honest, sincere relationships with others around me? How am I inviting others into that? If you're constantly doing that in a proactive way, when you actually need to tap into that community, you're not like, crap, I don't have anybody. It's easier to make those hard asks if you developed that relationship. So like, admissions people, marketing people inside universities and colleges, you're seeing more and more often them asking their departments to play a role in the marketing message of the university. Like, we can't reach all of these students in the personal way. We need you, department chair, to help us reach out. And there's pushback, understandably so, because these department chairs, faculty, staff, they're strapped, budgets are tight, and so they're getting more and more put onto their shoulders, and they're like, now I'm a marketer too. But if you're in community with them, you know how to equip them, you know how to make that ask, you know how far is too far, and it's going to be an easier ask because it's a spirit of collaboration that you've already created.
Can anybody develop then or start building community and have it be effective, or do you feel like it probably needs to start, for example, if we're talking about a corporation or we're talking about colleges, right, where there's multiple levels and departments, it has to be something that leadership reinforces? Or do you feel like, well, yes, in a perfect world, that's the answer, Jeremy, but ultimately, even if your boss or the person above you is not doing it, you can still develop community yourself?
Absolutely. You can't wait on the people above you to do that work for you. It might mean that your efforts can't go as far. It might mean that you are in it for the long journey as opposed to it moving quicker because the leadership above you just isn't on board. But you don't need to wait for the leadership above you for you to get on board. So, for example, if you are looking to increase DEI initiatives in your department and you're trying to attract more diverse faculty, you're not going to do that just by posting job postings to certain publications. Like, you have to put in the work to develop relationships with that community so that when the time comes that you have a job posting, you already know this person is perfect for this role. And now I have a relationship with them so that I can have a conversation and make sure that it's going to be a place where everybody can flourish as a result.
I love what you said there. I feel like every single guest I've had on at some point on the podcast here has said, at its core, all of this stuff just goes back to building relationships and developing something that where, all right, if I ever get to the point where I need something from Lindsay or I want to get advice from you, hopefully I've built a good enough relationship where you're like, oh yeah, I'll make time for Jeremy. Oh yeah, I'll help, versus why would I want to help? He only reaches out when he needs something, or I have no clue, right? You want me to be, to your point earlier, a marketer now? You want me to be a recruiter? And at its core, for whatever reason, so many people, I think, struggle to build relationships. Do you think it's a time issue and people just don't want to commit to saying, well, wait, it's not like I can just say, cool, I'm going to have a 5-minute conversation with Lindsay and like we never have to do it again and now I built a relationship? Or is it something else that really holds us back as humans from developing that, relationship and that community building?
Oh, that's a deep, loaded question, but I read a quote 2 days ago, and it was, making friends as an adult is hard because all of the people that I would want to be friends with don't want to leave their houses either. And it just cracked me up as an introvert because I'm like, I so get that, And so I do think that there is some of that time factor. We live really busy lives and not always justifiably busy. Like, we spend our time on things that aren't always going to have a return on investment. I just said to my husband 2 nights ago, we were walking in our neighborhood, and I'm like, I miss the time when we actually had neighbors during COVID, when there was nothing else to do besides be neighbors, go out and talk with one another because everybody's lives had been paused. And so I think that demonstrates that, yes, it's hard to build relationships when it's not a priority. And it goes back to the authenticity flywheel, that community piece, like that we just take for granted. We think that it should be as easy as making a post on Instagram and bam, everybody loves us. But true relationship takes vulnerability, it takes accountability, and it takes time. It's not something that's developed overnight, and it can just feel really risky. Even in today's culture, it can feel really risky to enter into relationship with somebody because it's a transaction. They're asking something, you have to give something in return. So I think that that's a piece of it.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tears, Jaime Hunt, Corynn Myers, Jaime Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcast.enrollify.org.
I agree. And intentionality, I don't think I understood this as a 22-year-old professional coming out of college, but intentionality is so important, not only in building relationships, right, but in everything that you do. And back to your point, the way I define it to people is, to your point, you have to make time. This isn't I'm taking time to, no, I'm intentionally making time, right? Because I understand that Lindsay has either a skill that is somehow going to benefit me as I'm trying to help my audience that I serve, or you know what, I just like talking to Lindsay because she has a lot of the core values that I have, or she's a really nice person, or she's funny, or she's, and to your point, I don't think we all say, okay, yeah, let's do more of that. We really do take it for granted. And so if you're listening to this, I just encourage you to think of somebody in your world that you probably need to spend 5 or 10 or 15 minutes with, because you really don't know them as well as you think you do, to try to Lindsay's point earlier, develop a little bit stronger of a sense of community between you and that person. Let's move to this. I've been getting a lot of questions from leadership lately about the importance of positioning when it comes to defining your brand. Talk to me about positioning.
I love this question because in my work with clients, I really focus on 3 areas. You know, you say you've been getting a lot of questions about positioning, and that's one of the questions as well for me, but it always comes down to, I need help expressing my value. Like, I don't know what my value proposition is, like what really sets me apart from everybody else. I just don't know. What is my place? What is my positioning? Where do I belong? And then what is my proof? Like, how do I prove any of this? And so for me, really, positioning is just a piece of the branding puzzle. And so often people lead with that question, like, how do I position myself in the market? And I think that that's step number 1 of where we get it wrong. Like, if you're leading with what's our positioning, but you haven't done that work of self-knowing and really understanding, who am I anyways? Like, what are the stories that I've lived? What are the stories that I'm living? And how do those stories connect with the long arc of the life of my organization, of my brand? Like, what are those pieces? You have to understand your core values, the stories that have shaped you. You have to understand all of that first before you can start to get really clear on what your positioning is. And so that would be the first caveat I would issue is, don't start with positioning. You've got to start with that self-knowing first. And then once you are ready to move into positioning, that's when you do those things that most of us know to do, right? Is go ahead and look at your competitors. But now you're looking at your competitors through the lens of your own strengths. Like, you know your strengths, you own them unapologetically. And so you're not looking at your competitors with a, ooh, how can we be like them? You're looking at them with a, okay, this is what they do. Here's the gaps. And guess what? Wow, we fill those gaps. You know exactly now where you have leverage. You're able to talk to your audience. This is a huge one that is so easy to do, but so many brands don't do it. Like, have conversations with your audience. If you're a university, have conversations with your alums. Have conversations with prospective students. Talk to the students who don't show up. Like, people aren't having those conversations. One, because marketing departments at colleges and universities are strapped. Like, how do they even have those conversations? But 2, it's scary. Like, it can be scary to have those conversations, because what kind of feedback am I going to get? But without those, you're just driving your positioning, you're establishing your positioning with a bunch of assumptions. You're just saying, hey, this is where we want to go, and come hell or high water, that's where we're going. But you have to have those conversations if you really want to get it right. Not to mention, those conversations give you all sorts of messaging gold. You discover, hey, this is what we ought to be saying, or this is actually the resource that they need. This is where people are getting hung up. Without those conversations, you're just doing branding on repeat, which is why we see so much marketing that looks identical. Like, my son, my 3rd son is a senior now, and he's getting, inundated with college material, and almost everything that comes in the mail, I could swap out a college logo and put a different college logo on there, and it says the exact same thing. And it's not speaking his language. It's not speaking the language of a 17-year-old. It's speaking to me. If they were having conversations with him, or kids like him, if the people writing the material were having those conversations, those pieces would look really different. And that all goes back into the positioning. There's something that I call story copy versus sales copy. And when we do that positioning work, and we're bringing our self-knowing, we're bringing our knowledge of our competitors, we're bringing our knowledge of our audience into all of our decisions that we're making when we do our positioning. The last piece of positioning is, what's the message we're sharing? And so often we lead with the sales copy mentality. Like, how can we pack in all our value? How can we convince them that this is the place? How can we give all the bulleted details of scholarships and awesome campus living and all of these activities? But when you lead with story copy, which is something that I say is a message that's defined by connection and relationship, because that's what story does, you show up in a way that is like a breath of fresh air to the people on the other end receiving your materials. It's like, wow, this place feels real to me. Like, this place feels like a place that I can actually be a human. I want to know more.
Yeah, you just said a ton of stuff there I love. I don't know how many things I wrote down, but I would love to, unpackage a couple of those. The first thing, if you're willing to share, that I know I would love to hear, and I think the audience would too, what's getting your son's attention then?
Not a whole lot, to be honest. He's pretty set on where he's going to go, so he doesn't tune in a lot, but there's not a whole lot, because he'll read stuff and he will say, this sounds like every place else. None of that traditional messaging that is so common is grabbing him. For him, it's more about the realness. It's more about those student stories. It's more about him getting the inside peek of, ooh, if I go to this university, these are the cool things that happen in this dorm. And so that's where I want to live. He already knows where he wants to live, because he has learned through word of mouth about the traditions that go on there, the crazy things that no marketing piece is sharing with him, but he's learned through the insider knowledge. That's what's getting his attention. It's him talking to the students inside this school and learning, okay, these are the cool reasons why I want to come. That's why I'm going. None of it has to do with, ooh, I'm going to get a $14,000 scholarship here too, because every other school is giving me the same, tuition discount. Or these are all of the distinctives that look just like every, the 5 letters I received previously. None of that's tuning into him, because he doesn't care about that. He's 17. Like, he doesn't even have the anchoring to know college is really expensive. He doesn't, we care about that as his parents. He doesn't. He's caring about, what's it like to live here? How am I going to fit in? And what are some of the cool opportunities I'm going to get inside this major that really are unique to this major at this school? Those are the things grabbing him.
And I appreciate you sharing that. And that totally ties into the other thing that I wanted to dive into for a second, which is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, I feel like, and tell me if you agree or disagree, at least in your son's case with this, part of the problem is they all sound and look the same because, again, it feels way more transactional than it feels relational. And it's a lot of vomiting information, like you said earlier. And then tying in with the other thing that you said about 5 minutes ago, and I love it, and I'm going to repeat it because everybody listening needs to hear it and continue to shout it from the mountaintops. Your best assets are your current students and your alumni. I'll even go that far. You need to, every single year, go and tap into them through surveys, through one-on-one conversations, and leverage what they're telling you about your student experience. And so tying it all together for the audience, to your point, your son cares about a handful of things and doesn't know what he doesn't know. But if the right admissions counselor at the right school said, I know he wants to know about this in the dorms, and he wants to know about careers in this major and what internships will look like, I'll bet if that person knew how to write the copy in a way that felt personal to your son, tell me if you think I'm right or wrong, that might get his attention more than all the other stuff he's receiving.
Correct. It's more about that organic delivery. It's more about that organic delivery, and I'm not saying that those other pieces aren't important, because they are. Like, obviously, we have the data on what parents are using to help their children make decisions about where to go to school. So that data is important. The problem becomes when you have so oversaturated your audience with that data, and that's all you're giving them, or that you're not delivering it at the right point of the student journey. We know that maybe, they're problem aware or solution aware or, product aware, wherever they're at on that journey. You're giving them, you're still presenting, all the 10 bullet points about your university after they've applied, like thinking that they just need to keep hearing that so that they'll deposit in matric. And that may not be the point to keep hitting them with the same points that they're hearing from every other school. At that point, treat them like they're one of your own. Like, they are one of you. They've applied, they've been accepted, they're one of you. Now talk to them like they're actually one of you, like they're a student sitting across from your desk. There's a concept in marketing and in copywriting called the audience of one. And so that's a really good tip when you're creating your marketing materials. If you had just one student or one parent sitting across from you, what's that conversation going to look like? And are you sending marketing materials to them with that same conversation? Because if you aren't, then you need to back up and reassess. Like, people aren't worried about the formal academic language. They're not worried if you have every semicolon or if you're using ellipses instead of, an em dash. They just want you to be human and real. And we can get so hung up, especially in academic marketing, of let's be prim and proper and speak to them so that they know we're smart. They already know you're smart. You've already provided those details. They already see what students are graduating and going on to do. If they see all of that, you're not pulling them in and impressing them with all the big words and the perfectly punctuated sentences that you're putting in front of them.
Do you think you can scale those one-on-one conversations in a personal way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You could create videos that feel really personal and are maybe not directed specifically to that one student, but because, backing up, you've had enough conversations with your audience, you know what that message needs to be. And so it might feel organic, it might feel, highly personalized, but because there's only, 5 admissions counselors who can't send a bomb video text to every possible student, can you scale that in a way that feels really personal from this counselor? Absolutely.
So if you're giving advice to either a client or anybody listening as to, all right, you're not a huge name brand, right? And you're trying to get the attention of somebody to get them to go, maybe I know nothing about this coffee shop or this type of clothing or shoes, or it's a college or whatever. But you know what? You got my attention, and now I'm going to either listen to what you have to say or I'm going to read it. How do you get their attention in the first place?
This sounds maybe pat, but I guess it comes down to a few things. Know your audience and know who you're going after. You can't do the Jackson Pollock approach and just throw paint on the wall and call it a day. Like, you have to, when you know who you're targeting, it's easier to speak to them as that audience of one. So that's number one. Like, who are you targeting? And then what is it that you're offering? Like, be confident in your strengths and in your skill set, and just operate within that zone of genius, and trust that that zone of genius is going to start attracting the right people to you. So case in point, for me, when I started communicating to my audience, I really struggled with, all the advice is going to tell me to create a lot of how-to blogs and how-to resources and teach people about the concepts of story and how to replicate that, in their own business. But that wasn't like the core of who I am as a human. Like, I don't like to step in as teacher so much as just more like philosopher. That's my zone of comfort, is to really think deep about topics. And so when I stopped trying to be that subject matter expert and just showed up as that philosopher that is really who I am, and started putting out messaging that just like revealed the depths of my heart and the curiosity of my brain, I started attracting the right people. And they were like, hey, I read this article that you wrote about oranges and it really spoke to me. And that's what I want for my business as well. Like, it was mind blowing because it stood in the face of all the marketing advice of show up as expert, be the guide, have all of these resources, content. But that didn't resonate with who I was. And when I honored who I was, that's when I was able to learn more about my audience, to step into more relational experiences with my audience, and create messaging that connected us, create story that connected us. And so I think when you recognize your audience as human instead of just this transactional group of people that you have to try to persuade because you're desperate for enrollment or for revenue or whatever it is, when you honor that human connection, those things don't have to be learned for most of us. Like, we are relational beings by nature. And so when you take off the shackles and you let your counselors be those relational beings, you start to see the fruits of that. And I think sometimes counselors are just shackled by, this is what I'm told to do. These are the steps. I'm not allowed to step outside of that. And if you take that off and give some space and some freedom for them to truly be those relational beings that you've hired them to be, some of those things can happen organically.
I love that you were willing to share, one of your challenges, struggles, whatever you might want to call it, with everybody. Back to storytelling, there was two other things I wanted to, ask you about, because I really feel like you're an expert on all of this. What makes a story memorable, Lindsay? I mean, define it. I mean, you could go a bunch of ways with that, but cut it down to two or three things.
Yeah. I think what makes a story memorable is, number one, letting go of trying to make a story memorable. Like, when we set out to try to say, okay, I want this really to be meaningful, we often get lost in the details, and the intent gets sucked away by the formula or the frameworks that we've inserted. We start following everybody else, like so-and-so created this amazing story, and so we're going to replicate it. Well, the replication by nature means your story is not going to be memorable. And so to not chase memorable, but instead chase connection and resonance. Is this piece that we're creating, is this story that we're telling going to drive and invite connection? Is it going to resonate? It's not just about relevance. It's does it find its space deep in the soul of our audience and resonate, allow them to see themselves in the mirrors of our own stories. So those are two things, forget memorable, chase connection, chase resonance. Stories exist, I say, stories really exist kind of for two reasons: to build culture or to preserve culture. And so when we set out to tell a story, we have to understand, what's the goal here? Are we telling this story to build our culture or to preserve our culture? And when you understand the intent of that story, that's when you can address the other things of, is this sparking a connection? Is this creating an emotional response? Does this have mirroring capabilities where our audience can actually see themselves inside of this? Or are we talking so far over their heads that, in my son's case, they don't even care about this because it's a 17-year-old kid, and doesn't make them more curious to learn more. One of the things I talked about earlier this week with my audience is that we think often that stories have to, when we share stories as a brand, as a business, that we're sharing them to provide all the answers. And that's so false. It's so misguided. Stories shouldn't exist to provide all the answers. They should exist to spark curiosity, spark connection, spark conversation so that our audience is equipped to find those answers themselves. That's what story's job is, not to be like, hey, here's the answer, because that's not a story. That's what textbooks do. Stories don't do that. Stories have themes, they have symbols, they have feelings that lead the audience to the place that the audience needs to be. That's what story's job is. And when you do that, that's when it becomes memorable, because it's changed your audience. It's changed them.
Yeah. I call it emotional engagement, right? You're trying to your point, tap in and get some level of curiosity or emotional engagement from them. How do you think the way marketers use storytelling will change over the next 2 to 4 years? I mean, are we going to see more of something, less of something? What do you think?
I fear that what we will see is that it will become more formulaic. I mean, we already have the hero's journey that's talked about ad nauseum. And so people tap their stories, following the hero's journey. As we talk more and more about story, because you see it talked about more and more and emphasized more and more, our nature as humans and as marketers is to look for the easy way, and to start replicating what everybody else is doing. And so that's my fear, and that I would urge people to push back against. Like, don't just blindly fall into a formula because it's sold to you as the easy method. Because again, if story isn't reflecting your audience, if it isn't existing to build those connections, then it's not actually story. The other piece that I think that is on the horizon and that we are going to see demanded of more and more in the coming years is less deconstruction and more bridge building. I think people are getting exhausted with all the deconstruction. Like, it exists, it needs to exist, it's good, it has to be there. But people are hungry for that third question of the unbrand method. What can I do to fix it? Like, great, let's deconstruct, but now what? And I think we are seeing more and more people asking, now what? And stories need to lead our audience to that now what? What is your answer? What can you do to fix it? Your story has to answer that piece for your audience, especially an audience of university students and college students who want to know what is their role in all of this. You have to tell a story that invites them to see themselves inside of that.
That seems like a great way to kind of tie everything together. We do 2 things at the end of all of my podcasts, Lindsay, and so we're going to do them with you. The first is a signature question that I ask every guest. So I want you to tell us one important piece of advice that at some point in your life, it can be whenever you want, that somebody's given you that has really stuck.
For me, it was a woman who was about 20 to 25 years older than me. And she said to me, Lindsay, your problem is that you want to show up as perfect, or you don't show up at all. Like, that's your options. Show up as perfect or don't show up at all. She's like, you need to get past that. And it was just such a aha moment for me, because I was probably 38 at the time. And like, she so called me out. And so when she did, I was like, that is so true. And that somebody could see that in me and speak it to me in a way that I could receive it was really powerful to me. She could speak it to me in a way for me to receive it because we had developed a relationship. She waited for us to have that relationship before she said that to me, but it was life-changing. Like, it gave me the freedom to just, get the thing done. Don't rehash it over and over until it's absolutely perfect. Just put it out there, see where it lands. Just put yourself out there, just try it. So that's one of the most impactful pieces of advice I've received.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love that, again, it goes back to literally what we just talked about before I asked you that question, which is you took that advice from somebody you had built a relationship with, and you realized, okay, I'm self-aware enough to know, yeah, what she says is correct. Well, now I'm going to do something about it. Now what, right? As you said earlier. The last thing I'm going to do is what I call fun rapid fire. So I'm just going to give you about 5 or 6 things. Take us about 30 seconds, and I just want you to respond to them really quick, okay?
Okay.
Favorite country you've ever visited?
Oh, Ireland, for sure.
Who's the most competitive person you know? First thing that popped into your head, because I know somebody popped into your head.
I have a friend, her name is Julie Short. She is super competitive, but not in a mean way at all. You know, like she expects a lot. She's mostly competitive with herself. So that's who I would say. Shout out to Julie.
Most meaningful item on your bookshelf?
Oh, on my bookshelf. Okay, behind me, I have a children's book called Harry the Dirty Dog. And I love that story. It was a story I loved as a kid, and so it's on my bookshelf because it just is a story of transformation and identity, and it just, has spoken to me since I was 5. So,
Rumor has it you love to play the piano. How many times a week do you play?
it depends. Not often in the summer because my family's home. Probably 5 times a week when they're all gone.
And then the last one, and I know this is going to be fun for you, the Oxford comma, yay or nay.
Ugh, I say who cares?
Lindsay, I really appreciate you being on the show today. If anybody wants to reach out or follow you on social media, where's the best place to go and where should they find you?
Yep, they can find me at my website, which is lindsayhotmire.com.
We'll have it in the notes, so you will be good.
So look at the notes. And then online, the best place social-wise is LinkedIn. Connect with me over on LinkedIn. That's where I share a lot of my thoughts, my ideas, resources, anything like that. That's where you can find me.
Awesome. Lindsay, thanks for sharing so much with our audience today and taking time to talk to us.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great to chat.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mission Admissions with Jaime Tears. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.